New Amsterdam was renamed New York in 1664 after the British took over the colony. New York and other British colonies, including Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Maryland, were societies with slaves. Of the original 13 colonies, Carolina was the first in which slavery was the center of economic production, making it the first slave society. Racial slavery was sanctioned by Carolina's 1669 Constitution.
The Carolina colony, which was originally South Carolina and North Carolina, was founded about 1670. It's one of these gifts from Charles II to his friends. Here's a place to exploit, fellas, go to it.
Many South Carolinian whites came initially from Barbados, where the British had established a giant sugar economy with some 50,000 Afro-Caribbean slaves. The plantation system was merely transplanted, like a kind of virus, from the Caribbean to the American coast.
The more slaves that you brought gave you more land. You got 50 acres of land for every person that you brought into the Carolina colony. And so slavery was encouraged from the outset here. And of course, the key was to find the type of work that slaves could do to make the colony profitable.
As the enslaved cleared land, the planters searched for a way to exploit the Carolina Low Country. They tried growing cotton and indigo and raising livestock. The more they tried, the more they failed to find a lucrative cash crop. The enslaved were growing something they called oriza, or rice, for themselves. They had grown it for hundreds of years in West Africa.
Now, it's not knowledge that they hold to themselves. Once they have shown other people how to plant this crop, they've lost control of the knowledge. And an entire economy based on exploitation of Africans is in place within a generation. And the shipment of Africans to South Carolina skyrockets.
So many of the Africans who were enslaved during the 17th and 18th century were ex-soldiers. Some of them would be captured through wars or civil wars. And these victors would sell the captives off to the Europeans. This had the advantage from their point of view of reducing their numerical strength, especially the soldier population of the opponents.
Their march to the coast. Many of them had not been to the coast before. They had not seen the ocean. They see white people for the first time. Who are these people? There was this folklore about cannibalism. Lots of slaves who were brought to the coast really were so afraid that these people were going to eat them.
Some of the people owning South Carolina are also invested in the Royal Africa Company and the slave trade themselves. They're getting a profit at both ends out of this.
The major profit came from the human cargo of enslaved Africans. Slave trading had become the basis of an international economy.
There are a variety of auxiliary industries, that is shipbuilding, insuring those ships, making sales for those ships. So the expansion of slavery then is an essential part of the expansion of capitalism.
As the ships came from West Africa and people were dying, their bodies would be thrown overboard, usually in the middle of the Atlantic. But once in a while, the captains would wait until they arrived at Charleston Harbor. So one of these captains threw several dozen overboard. And their bodies, including children, began to wash ashore. So the governor became very upset. And it wasn't because this was a crime against humanity. It was because the smell was irritating to the white population.
Nane yegun sao aye asasiya nane yegun sao aye.
In many African communities, there's this reverence for the ancestors and this reverence for those who are now in the spirit world, a belief that they are watching over. And I think that that is what sustains so many people at their weakest and their lowest moment.
On Sullivan's Island, the English established a pest house where they could quarantine people off of incoming ships.
These people were thought of as goods, as cargo. And in the language of the slave trader, this was a place where goods were held until they could reach full market value. This is the perfect example of the inhumanity of the slave system.
The most valuable workers were men younger than 20. And the second most valuable were women younger than 20. Children were young and inexpensive, and they would grow up and live a long time and produce a lot of rice.
For a person just arriving, you know you've been aboard this ship for a long time, but you probably don't know exactly how long. You don't know where you have gone. Of course, the number one thing on your mind is, how do I get out of here? How do I get myself free?
Those who died were probably buried in mass graves. The people who had died en route were probably 1/4 to 1/3 of those who had actually boarded the ship. Those who finally survived were taken to Charleston, where they were waxed down with oil, fed a good meal, and then put on the auction block.
For the enslaved, survival took many forms. Some pretended to be ignorant or represented their master's interests. However, many refused to conform. They maintained their dignity by drawing strength from their spirituality and culture.
Even though people may not have spoken the same language, and even though people may have been rivals traditionally in their homelands, there would have been a certain spiritual bonding that took place, that people came together and fused themselves together in this new world.
By the 1720s, enslaved black people outnumbered whites by more than 2 to 1 in the Carolina Low Country.
Slavery was probably unique in every region where it flourished. Massachusetts, New York, Virginia, and Barbados. But in South Carolina, it was probably the most industrial form of slavery because the scale was so great. The task system was something that was unique to South Carolina, whereby enslaved people had a given assignment on each day. So they usually went to work in the morning at sunrise, and a day's task in the field would be to hoe 1/4 of an acre, which was 105 feet square. People spent most of the year up to their knees in mud, bent over, tilling away at the soil under the sun. Rice was a very demanding master.
In South Carolina, slaves are worked almost to death, and then they go back to Africa and they go get some more, and they're continually replenished.
In Central Africa, men generally don't do agricultural work. There's even a proverb: if you want to humiliate another man, you say, "You're no man, take up a hoe," indicating that only women would do this kind of work. And yet here in South Carolina, men were being forced to work right alongside of women. Anyway.